Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Urban Development Subcommittee meeting of Thursday, the 29th of July. I have an apology for lateness from Councillor Rainey, and Mayor Rees is joining us on Zoom. Do we have any other apologies? No? Okay, so I will move those. Second, Councillor Courtney. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Order of business is as per the agenda. Do we have any updates to the interest register? And if we have any conflicts at the as we get to the substantive items, just feel free to let me know, but none have been brought to my attention. Good. we do actually have, so I wasn't sure if we had it available to go on the screen, but we actually do have the karakia, so we will actually stand for tuia. Thank you. Tuia ke runga, tuia ke raro, tuia ke roto, tuia ke waho, tuia te hera tangata, ka ronga te po, ka ronga te ao, huie, ka kie. Thank you, everybody, and apologies, that was a little bit out of order. So we will now go to the public forum, and I am delighted to welcome Carrie Mazzina, who is the Director of Nelson Tasman Housing Trust. So, of course, we've been reading lots of exciting updates in the paper recently, but let's have all the inside scoops. Thank you, Carrie.
Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I appreciate the invitation from the chair. I know I just have a brief time, and I'm simply going to speak, and there's, I guess, 10 minutes or so, and I'll totally open to questions. The main thing I want to focus on is the urgency that we at Nelson Tasman Housing Trust feel around getting more affordable and social housing built in Nelson and Tasman. And we're working hard on that. I mean, you would have seen the news. We've got a new development at Murphy Street. That's all public housing, and that's through Housing and Urban Development Fund, Housing and Urban Development funding. We have other projects in train, and we're hoping to be able to do those in partnership with council through the Housing Reserve. And so one of my main points is the urgency that we feel. We're very concerned about the delay in implementation of the Housing Reserve. Now, I appreciate it's complicated, and I know you're working hard, and it is important to get it right. But there's some practical effects of the long time that it's taking for the Housing Reserve to play out. So, for example, at this property we have at 99 Muritai Street, it's one of our classic approaches is to buy a large section. This is a 1,200 meter, 1,000 meter section, quarter-acre section, old house, large backyard. We're going to remove the house, which is no longer fit for purpose, rentable, and we've got a plan, and we've just lodged the resource consent application to put 5 homes on there. So 4 2-beds and a 4-bed, and that matches what we know is the community need. So that's just one example. Now, we do have a philanthropic funder who's ready to contribute, but they want their funds to leverage other funds and not just bank finance. So that's why we intend to come to the Housing Reserve, and apply for that support. If the Housing Reserve isn't functioning until, for another several months, that will push back or could potentially push back construction on that site. And the concern for us is, how long do we wait? How long do we delay construction? Because you all be very familiar with the technical bureaucracies of local government and central government, and we could opt to develop that site as public housing, but there's a whole other process and series of hoops to go through there, and that will change the cohort of people that we could house there. So there's a large group of people in the Nelson community who don't actually qualify for public housing and who have a really hard time coping in the private rental market. They're working, but they're on low incomes, and it's part-time work or seasonal work. And so the affordable rental housing that we want to keep building will serve those people who are fundamental to our community. They're working, they're contributing, we need them. So we feel urgency. And I mean, I know that council has strong intentions. I mean, you've been consulting on housing affordability as a key strategic priority for 3 years now. And we would just really like to see some tangible result come from that. The second thing I want to speak to is the enduring aspect of what we do and the multiplier effect that we can bring to any council contribution to the housing we provide. So, because one of the comments I've heard, just in talking with different council people offline is, oh, well, if we put in upfront capital, then it's gone. I was like, well, hang on a minute. It is not gone. This is an asset that will endure and that will grow in its effect over time. And something I did this week, I spent some time putting together some charts, which I have fed to staff. So that information can be made available to the subcommittee or full council. But there's 3 ways in which upfront capital from council that Nelson Tasman Housing Trust can make that grow and make the impact of it be bigger than, what may actually occur on a certain date. So, for example, at 99 Muritai, this development we've just lodged resource consent on. If the housing reserve were to contribute upfront capital of $750,000, that would be about 30% of the cost of the scheme when you include land. We have a philanthropic funder who will match that contribution, and then we can go to the bank to borrow the rest to complete the development. Tenants' rents would help us pay the mortgage and operating costs. So right there, we can multiply the council investment by more than a factor of 3. Okay, there's that. Then 5 homes are built, 12 bedrooms. Usually our tenancies last about 5 years. Some people stay longer, some move sooner for personal or family or work reasons. But if you extend that out over time, you can have not just 12 people housed, but multiples of that over time. I mean, it gets, if you go out 25 years, you go out 50 years, it's more and more families served. So the benefit of that relatively small capital investment up front is felt positively by multiple people over time. The third way that this investment gets multiplied is Nelson Tasman Housing Trust. We're set up as a charitable trust. We'll be here for a very, very, very long time. We're building assets that endure. The houses don't go away. They're going to be in the community for 50, 80 years, and then they would get redeveloped. But the purpose of our trust is to hold these assets long-term so that they provide warm, dry, affordable housing for people on low incomes in perpetuity. And in our trust deed, it's written in that if something dire were to happen and we had to, for some reason, wind up, I don't see that happening, but if we did, the assets would have to go to a similar organization. Okay, so these are not assets that are going to get sold into the private market and then they're gone from community use. So there's enduring long-term effect. There's a multiplier effect of any upfront capital contribution. The one other thing I'll add is that some people have said, oh, well, why don't we just loan you the money? And frankly, we're very bankable. We can go to the bank. We've got a strong relationship with our bank. We don't need loans. Upfront capital is what makes affordable housing possible. Yeah. Keep going? Okay. Oh, there was a ding. I was like, oh. Yeah, any questions? Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to say before I go to questions?
Nope, that's good.
Okay, great. Councillor Brian.
Yeah, excellent, Jim. Hey, thanks, Chair. I really appreciate the presentation. I'm just wondering, is there a restriction on long-term leases? So, we've got, say we've got council land or there's other land there that we would like to lease. Is that a barrier or is that an option?
Depends on the length of the lease. In part, if it's a 5-year lease, that's not useful. If you're talking, a 50-year or a 99-year lease, that's much more useful. However, financially, what a lease does is that it limits asset growth. And one of the things as we go forward that will enhance the financial strength of what we're doing and the amount that we're able to build is that as we can build up assets, then the bank can take security and we can borrow against that. So on a lease, you're limited. So that would hamper long-term, what we could do. It's not impossible, but it hampers it. Yeah.
So Brian, can you use your microphone?
If I go back to the second element, you're talking about the average tenancies over 5 years.
Yes.
If it's about just housing some people in affordable housing for a period of time, does that alter the equation at all, or is that an option? Was that something?
Are you talking about?
Rather than,
are you talking about us mandating a limit to how long people can stay? I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
Well, part of the response to the question before was about building up the asset and the value of the asset, which that helps with you build up the assets, increase in value, gives you more capacity.
It allows us to borrow more to build more. Yeah, it's not about lining someone's pocket. It's about about having the ability to borrow further to build more.
No, but I'm just stepping back to the second element about where you talked about the average tenancies last about 5 years.
Yeah.
And over a period of time, whether it be 50 years or 99 years, how many of those, you use the example of Muritai Street of 12.
Yeah.
And it just, rather than, I'm just saying is that reorientating the emphasis of what you're doing from so much building up an asset, but more just housing people.
Absolutely. Well, we're building homes so that we can provide homes for people in need. Yeah. So at Muritai, if we build 5 homes and if on average people stay for 5 years, over 25 years, we'd actually be assisting not just 5 families, but 25 families.
And I think, does that have if we were to say, oh, well, I'm just sort of shooting ideas in the breeze. We've got an asset of land and we give that, decide it's a lease for 50 or 99 years, whatever, a peppercorn rental, for instance.
Yes.
Does that give you some leverage to build a house without having, without dipping into your own capital or increasing your...
Well, it would reduce the cost of the scheme because if it's at a peppercorn rental, you don't have land cost. But it would not add as much value to our balance sheet, so it would limit borrowing there. Okay. But again, access to land is one of our challenges. It's very competitive out there in the private market. Housing is unbelievable. Well, everybody knows it's unbelievably expensive, but we're competing with private developers to purchase large sections to redevelop. So if council were able to make available land that we could lease or land that could be transferred via the housing reserve or some mechanism, that would be very, very useful. That would be an excellent investment and contribution from council.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'll just follow up that myself. So something that through the research that Nikki McDonald and I did through March through May, the community land trusts came up quite a bit. So Hamilton, I think it was, City Council have invested into a community land trust in their region. Other regions are looking at it. And of course, it's a model that's been used overseas. So do you have any thoughts? This has just been thrown at you, but probably not a new concept for you at all. So thoughts on maybe some of the reserve being used to invest, like Hamilton, I guess, into a community land trust so that land could be, provided at a peppercorn rental?
It's, what you're talking about is a mechanism that in our sector is referred to a vehicle to enable progressive home ownership. That's really what you're talking about. So it's either people get into it on a rent to buy, or there's some agreed shared equity scheme. We would certainly look at that. There's a couple reasons we have been focusing on building rental homes. One is those have been the particular strings attached to the particular funding streams that we've been accessing. So there's always that. But there's also one of the features of the Nelson economy is that about 30% of our population are on low incomes. Some of those are on benefits. An awful lot of those are on a mix of benefits and work. And people's work and income goes up and down because the work they get is part-time, or it's seasonal, or it's casual. And folks in those circumstances, it's extremely difficult for them to get a mortgage because the banks won't lend to someone unless there is enough income and enough history of income. So the community land trusts they really work to serve a section of the population who are in a position economically to get into the housing market. So that means they've got enough income and enough stable income. And philosophically, I'd completely support, people getting into home ownership. Yes, that is a good thing. But our economy has been changing, and the Nelson economy, whole sections of it are quite, embedded in fish processing and in fruit picking and, in seasonal work. So, yes, community land trusts are a useful vehicle. That will not be the panacea for the community and affordable social housing need that we have. So we need both, really. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll go to Mayor Rees.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Judine. Hi, Kerry. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Look, thank you for your presentation, and I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing and the thinking that's going on here. I just want to try and reconcile the sort of supply side, and can you give me a sense of, since I'm asking on the spot, so apologies that I haven't sort of forewarned you of this, but sort of say since 2015-16, which is kind of when the big spike of acceleration and growth started for the housing register. How many houses has the Housing Trust been able to bring to the market during that period?
Since 2015?
Yeah, roundabout.
Yeah. 2015, we were still utilizing some money from the government SHU fund. So we built, so there were projects that had started before 2015. So we completed 4 more homes at St. Lawrence Street, and then we built 6 more at Orchard Street. And since then, until now, we haven't been able to build any because of basically the government funding settings changed, made it much, much harder for community housing providers to build. They're now much better. And what also has changed for us is we're focused on fundraising, and we've got a philanthropic funder on board. So immediately we've got some upfront capital to suddenly start moving with. The thing is, for us to be able to do more, we need more upfront capital.
Okay.
Upfront capital enables us to purchase land, and it enables us to drive down the cost of a housing scheme, to borrow less, which means we can charge below market rent. That's what makes it affordable.
Okay, so that SHU fund was there, and that was so because I had a feeling that there hadn't been, that basically the supply side for you guys had been really constrained over the last sort of 4 years. So
yes, absolutely.
So just so we've got confidence, because this is about partnership with government, local government, community housing providers, and private sector. Can you just explain to the committee what it is that the government's now brought forward that would make that a really good partnership for us to come on board with as well?
For the community housing sector, the government is offering long-term contracts to deliver public housing and an operating supplement on top of that. But that is just for us to build more public housing. So that's more housing for people on the government's housing register. So these are people, the old language was Housing New Zealand. So community housing providers can now deliver the same highly subsidized rents through government funding. Current government funding settings, there is no money to build affordable rental homes. And that's where our submissions to council have really been around, look, if the housing reserve can focus in that area, that will fill a gap. Now, long term, central government housing settings change, the political winds change. There will be change, but my crystal ball is pretty muddy. Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing is the central government, they are experimenting with funding some progressive home ownership. That's the and the local Nelson Habitat group, their scheme on Main Road Stoke, that is one of those pilot programs. Next year, the government may release more funding. They want to come up with a model that they think will work across New Zealand to do progressive home ownership, but they haven't made that available to across the board yet. So we're watching that with interest.
Okay.
But again, we need to find a way, not just through central government, but local government, to get the housing reserve funds into the community so they're making a difference as soon as possible.
Okay, couple of follow-ups. So in that case, what I'm hearing is you're comfortable with our focus around affordable. Is that right? That you're going, okay, that's good, because that seems to be with the work that that Julian, the chair's done, and Nikki McDonald. That's sort of, I think, where we're landing, that it's going to be in that space. So, and look, I absolutely with you on, the urgency of doing this. I'll have some questions for the officers in a moment. But and the other part is around the land, and I heard Brian asking you some questions around the land supply. So I guess that's the other part of it, of what can we bring to the table? We can help with an affordable space, but also the consideration around land supply. Just in terms of that land supply, are there ways that we can assist with the private sector to help? We've talked about inclusionary zoning before, and we'll be doing some advocacy to government around that, which I'm sure is something that we've all talked about, but we haven't seen any progress on yet. But at the moment in Nelson, are there projects where you could see us playing a part to help the private sector actually come forward with some land to make it available for community housing?
Yes. My tahi.
Okay, so there's a willing, is it in that, would that be in a sense of the development, or actually having to purchase the land?
No, I'm aware of the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, and and my understanding is those funds through central government are earmarked for councils to help fund further infrastructure to enable more particularly affordable residential development occur. And I think there's a strong opportunity there.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think that group can do it without council.
Okay, but you think there's an opportunity there for the community housing providers and affordable housing in that development. So that's your sense of it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Chair, I've just got a question at the end for the officers.
Okay, thank you. Mel.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you, Kerry, for coming in. Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, for inviting her in. Great to have you here, and appreciate, like others have said, the work you're doing. So the hurdle for you at the moment, we're talking about right now, is perhaps the mindset of council around the table to sort of retain this housing reserve as much as we can so that we can continually, progressively give it out to other community housing providers. Is that the stumbling block? Is that the hurdle that you're trying to overcome, that mindset that we have there?
Well, I'd encourage council to think more in terms of enduring impact rather than the fund itself enduring. Because, I mean, you know, another view is when I read that in the previous paper that came through this committee, it sounded like council was focused on keeping a hold of the fund and drip feeding it over time. Yeah. And frankly, from our point of view, that will really diminish the impact of the fund. Yeah. Housing costs are continuing to escalate. This money is worth the most it will ever be now. I come back to one of the main points I wanted to speak to, and I'll emphasize it again. If the housing reserve, if you focus on, as you have said in numerous previous consultation documents, that you intend to use the housing, the sale of a community housing asset to feed that back into affordable and social housing, work with skilled partners who can deliver that long term. Council hanging on to the funds long term will diminish their purchasing power over time, and you'll have fewer homes built in the community as a result.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. I think it deserves a rethink because you've read it numerous times, and that is the thinking around the table. But the reality of it isn't quite like that, is it? Really, as you've explained so well. Yeah. So you want to overcome this. You want an exception to that.
My understanding is the work is underway currently to fine tune and to nail down what's the vision for the housing reserve, what are the objectives, what are the criterias, and the draft vision said something around an enduring fund, and I'm just saying, look, my suggestion is think more in terms of an enduring impact and actual results in the community. That is what endures. Because housing is a long-term asset, and building it is, an increasingly expensive exercise. So if you work with skilled partners who can leverage and make the most of, so that the housing reserve is a fraction of the total housing costs, that will be a big win. We're not, we wouldn't come to you and say fund 100% of a scheme, because that's not necessary. That's not a good use of your money. We know we can leverage it. So, work with partners who can multiply the effect of your money, who will build an asset and run it well over the long term, and who will help more and more and more people going forward.
Well, finally, oh my goodness, I've dropped my water. You're optimistic still? Your dealings with council officers are still ongoing, and
look, we want to be, and we are a long-term proactive partner with council. So, things are. This is an example. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the subcommittee today. I know there's a lot of high-quality people doing, working hard at council, and this is a challenging space, but every day is for different reasons.
Yeah, every day is a new day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Carrie, do you have any sense of how many beds or houses, 12 million would build today? So, if we were able to give it out.
Quick, where's my phone? Where's my calculator? Right. Yeah. Look, if we were doing it today, and if we were simply using, the housing trust model, at today's costs, immediately we could triple the 12 million to be 36 million. if a housing scheme costs about 2.5 million at today's prices, what's 2.5? Quick, Brian, where's your phone? 2.5 divided by 36 divided by 2.5 million.
Are you not?
How many schemes? What? No, no. I know it's 2.5, but if you 2.5 million will get you 12 bedrooms. Yeah.
What was it, Gail?
So, okay. 17.
Okay.
Okay. So 70 times 12 bedrooms. That's more than 140 bedrooms, more than 140 people housed. Right now, multiply that over, in 10 years' time, that'll be a significant multiple of that. And in 10 years' time, that asset value will have grown significantly so that the providers delivering those homes can borrow more to build more. So it's quite as, if you're actually delivering with that 12 million homes for 140 people immediately, that's more than Kaingaora have built in the last 3 years, and it's more than it's more than the Housing Trust homes, where our 44 homes are lived in by 120 people. Okay, so you can have a very significant impact. Yeah.
If you don't mind, I might get you. Can you email through that maths just so we can
Yes.
double check it?
Yeah, that would be good to double check.
Not that I don't trust
Yes, I
people
will.
around the room, but
Yeah. Okay.
But it's an interesting exercise, so it'd be good to actually go.
Yeah.
This is
So
how it would be.
shall I? Do you want me to email that to you or to staff?
Gabrielle would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, thank
Yep.
you.
Will do.
Yeah, and I just actually want to comment. I do. I mean, you may have seen the article in the paper, and getting that definition on enduring, what it means, I think is one of our. We got to a point and we went, okay, which is I guess one of the reasons why. Every time we think we're a bit further ahead, then we come to a decent point where we go, this needs a bit more attention.
Yep.
And so, we just need to work out how we conceptualize it and whether the entire 12 million is dealt with in the same way. I guess that's the other one.
Yeah.
Do you have some grants, some loans, some land, and I guess it's making sure that you rule out all those things you don't want, so that the money doesn't get wasted or able to get, flipped into market prices, but also have enough flexibility within it so it enables people to innovate, do something different, or it doesn't lock out something that we today haven't heard about as a model.
I completely agree with that, Judine. I think because the three main chips in Nelson, Abbey Field Habitat and Nelson Tasman Housing Trust, we have different financial models, we have different housing products, if you will, and the funding structures that support those are slightly different. So absolutely, you need to build in that variety and that flexibility, but also draw your boundaries so that you're having the impact that you want to have. Can I make one other comment on this question of affordability, that the mayor was referencing? The international definition of affordable housing is where the cost to the dweller of the housing is no more than 30% of their income. So affordable housing is not a price point. It's not for some people, $650,000 to buy a house is very affordable. For others, no way. Same with rents. So, and I'm certainly willing offline to feed more information to staff or to the subcommittee to help with that. But a concern would be, one could, for example, in Wellington, there's a scheme where Wellington Council has done a deal with, I think it's the Wellington Company to repurpose an inner city dwelling and doing it as affordable housing. But it's affordable housing for inner city workers who are making $85,000, $90,000, $100,000 a year. And so the rents are quite high. I would argue attempting to do something like that with this fund, I would be profoundly wrong. You have sold a community housing, social housing asset in the pensioner housing, and you've got 12 million for it. The intent that you have publicly consulted on is that those funds would go for more affordable and social housing for low-income people. So I encourage you to stick to that. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, at the workshop we had, which ended up during Rise Up to Level 2, that unfortunately the Chips couldn't join us at, Kay Saville-Smith came to, and she made some similar points around affordability and well, I guess, again, the enduring, something that only has a life of, say, 15 years or something like that, also isn't enduring. Now, Rachel has just a question for staff. So I'll come to you for that, Rachel.
Thanks, Judine. And just reflecting on Carrie's last points about affordability, I just actually meant to be at the moment preparing a presentation for affordable housing conference in Auckland, and certainly the issue about income levels and affordability is a big issue for our region. And the only thing I'd say is defining what low income means also varies between region to region, and that's one of the issues we have to deal with. So there's a large part of our population that is suffering from a housing affordability issue. The question I've got for staff is, when are we going to have be able to go live on actually responding here with the housing reserve? You know, I guess I'm really aware of the pressures on a number of actions around the housing stream at the moment, but I'm really conscious of the fact that this is a priority both for the council and the community, and particularly for our partners who are waiting to try and make decisions. So can we get a basically an understanding or a timeline from here? And if there are some barriers to delivering this, and if we hear the timeline and the committee feels that that's just a delay that the community can't afford, then we need to have some solutions for how we're going to speed this up. So I just want to understand from the officers what have been the barriers to getting it to come forward, and timeline, and and then are there things that we could do here to assist this coming more quickly so that some construction can actually get underway. Thank you.
So through the chair, thank you for your question, Madam Mayor. We've picked this up recently, as Carrie is aware, in terms of the city development team, and we've done a purposing and focusing of the team members. So Gabrielle is now working on the housing reserve. It's meant I've had to take her off some other things, but we've managed to juggle things around. So in terms of the timing from here, it's proposed that we'll have a council workshop August, early September, to all of the things that you've raised, Carrie, are spot on. It's the thinking that Gabrielle's already well across. We also want to get some economic advice. So your responses in terms of how many houses that might actually provide was very, very helpful. And then we can set a committee meeting as soon as possible after that, so we can look at what that meeting framework might look like.
If I can just add to that, yeah, I have indicated that if it falls within meeting cycles or things like that, then we can always schedule an extraordinary one, or go to full council, because I don't want the existing schedule to be the reason that it slowed down.
Okay, Judine, if I could just sort of do a follow-up question. So that's and Claire, thank you, because I realise that this is moved across teams and council, but it's still been an absolute priority for council. So recognise that it's had to come your way, and that put some demands. So would it be helpful if we, contracted some extra resource to try and, just to make sure that, because my concern is that, we're talking August, September for workshop, and then something after that, September. Then we've actually got to get through assessing applications. So someone's going to have a look at the applications and get things done. And it would just break my heart if we're sitting here, well, it will by September, but if it's sitting in it's December before we've actually got an agreement signed, then to me, that's it doesn't feel, as a governor, as the mayor of the city, it doesn't feel consistent with a good faith kind of urgency that we're talking about. And I say that with absolutely no reflection on a really hardworking staff team, but from an organisational perspective, that isn't, to me, responding to the crisis in a way that is reflective of the crisis.
So again, through the chair, we have got a project plan that we've developed that we will work through with Judine in terms of making sure that we've got as much resources we possibly need to get this done as timely manner as we possibly can. So we're committed to doing that.
Okay, one final question. So I hear today Kerry's talked through, and it's not a new conversation, because this is a conversation we've been having probably since December last year, is the issue of enduring outcomes. And I know in the workshop discussions there's been loans, and we've talked about today about what the challenges are with that. So in what's coming back, is there some alternative model that's going to be better than perhaps what the proposition that Kerry's putting in front of us today?
So again, through the chair, we're traversing all of the options, all of the ones that we know about, all of the ones that we've know about from others, and we will put all of those options on the table in terms of what might give the most enduring outcomes for Nelson. And also, I think Carrie's point about all of the different chips have different models as well. We also need to think about that in the mix.
But can I just follow up? So is the office's view at this point in time that there may be equally as good or better options than that will work with a loan funding scenario rather than an investment of capital that will be going into enduring land or enduring housing? Do you think a loan is the work to date, is that demonstrating that a loan scenario will work?
So through the chair, I really am not in a position to be able to answer that today, Rachel. We don't know. We haven't done all of that work.
Okay, all right. Well, maybe I'll follow that up when I can get somewhere back near the council building. Thank you. And apologies to the committee. From time to time, I'm going to have to disappear to have a coughing fit with the video off, because you don't need to see it when I'm on the video. So I am here listening, but the video disappears. I haven't disappeared. I'm just coughing.
I guess if I just follow up on the question you just asked, Rachel, some of that will also, I think, come down to us, and it's the conversation we've had, is how the councillors choose to conceptualise enduring. And that might then actually resolve, potentially, depending on how we land it, the loan issue. Because if we look at enduring impacts versus just enduring capital, then the answer to that question will actually be quite different. So that's why I'm quite keen to have that councillor workshop, because I think the direction we set will actually then narrow what the staff need to do.
Okay, thanks, Jude. I think that would be really useful. So I'd encourage that happening as soon as possible, because I'm really concerned about how long we're taking to stand this up. But then I'm also conscious that once we do, there's going to be a process to play through, and there are projects sitting out there at the moment that could be delivering to houses to people that absolutely desperately need them. Thank you.
Thank you. Kerry, that probably felt like a long 10 minutes to you, but I think the value we got from it was worth those 10 minutes you've given us today.
The best things are timeless.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, and probably it was in lieu of the workshop you couldn't come to, and so it's been great, and keep up the good work as well. Thank you.
Thanks, will do.
Okay, so we'll now go to the minutes on page 6 through 9. Happy to move Brian, second by Mel. Comments or corrections? All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Super, thank you. We now have the Chair's report, which is on page 10 and 11. Look, we've probably traversed the housing reserve side of it. City centre spatial plan is going straight to council in August. Things weren't ready for this meeting, and I didn't want to delay it further by waiting for a future urban development subcommittee meeting. But, you know, we've had some really good updates and workshops on that with all of council. So I think everyone should be feeling pretty well informed on that. So I've got nothing to add. Unless there's any questions, I'm happy to move the recommendation. Second by Brian. Okay, all those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. We will now invite Gabrielle and Chris forward for a slightly meaty report, the Housing and Business Capacity Assessment, page 12 through 344.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you have noted, this is a chunky report that we're bringing to you today. This report really is about assessing our demands for housing and business land against our existing and future growth capacity to determine whether we've got sufficient capacity to accommodate our projected growth demands over the 30 years. It's a requirement of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development that we do this HBA. What needs to be in this, when I say HBA, I'm talking about this Housing and Business Capacity Assessment. And the content of that, of the assessment, is largely governed by the National Policy Statement's requirements for what needs to be in there. For council, that is largely making sure that we have sufficient land that is zoned or planned to be zoned, and land that is serviced or planned to be serviced over that short, medium and long term. The assessment results in 2 reports because we're a joined urban environment with the Tasman district. A larger report solely focusing on the Nelson part of that joined urban environment, and then a combined report on the combined results from both Tasman and Nelson's urban environment. You'll see from the report that the conclusion for Nelson is that there's a shortfall in housing capacity amounting to 864 dwellings over the long-term period. And for business land, although there's a sufficiency of business land overall for the 30 years, within that there's an insufficiency of commercial business land. Now those results change a little bit for the joined up urban environment report, where that insufficiency of housing land reduces to 736 because Tasman had a small surplus. So happy to talk through any questions as they arrive. Chris, but before we get into that, just to note that the team, although this report has my name on the bottom of it, it's actually prepared by the team. Chris is our analyst, so he'll answer all those technical questions that you might have. And normally Lisa would be here as well. She feeds into this report, but unfortunately she isn't able to be with us today.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Thanks, Chris. Opportunity to ask any questions. I think I was going to through a couple. One was the competitive margin, that figure of 20%. Perhaps the explanation of how that's calculated and the rationale behind it.
So the 20%, it's actually not 20% over the whole period. It's 20% over the first 10 years and then 15% over the 20 years after that. And that's actually set out in the National Policy Statement. So that's not something that we've come up with. That's something that's been set down in the MPS.
In terms of the spread of the commercial industrial land, is that shortfall in any particular areas within the city boundaries?
No, the work done by Sense Partners treated Nelson as one catchment, and the reason for that was that, and we do talk about that in this report. We sort of treat the overall urban area as a single catchment for most of the assessment, and that's really because we are a urban territorial authority. We're not, we're not the size of Christchurch, where you've got some very distinct sort of suburbs that almost could operate on their own as a separate town. So, and that's reasonably consistent with things like our development contributions policy does the same, and it's reasonably consistent with how we've done things in the past. What we do look at is the difference between industrial land and commercial land, and where we look at the shortfall of commercial land that was identified. When we're looking at industrial land that could be converted to commercial land through a plan change or something similar, we have done the analysis based on looking for land that's close to the centre city, so where there's actually likely to be demand for it, rather than just saying it can occur anywhere.
Okay, thanks. Ian, Mel?
Thanks, Ryan. Chris, have we got to look, it certainly confirms for us, doesn't it, with residential, that we have a crisis over the next few years with 864 shortfall in residential. So are we looking at sort of innovative ways of reaching out to these landowners? Do we sort of approach them at all, do you know, or encourage them to sort of bring their land to market?
We have regular contact with them as they come in for asking advice around resource consents, and we contact them about their plans. We have done for this HBA. They're responding to the market. There's no real incentive for them to bring on too many sections to the market, even if they're able to, because there are constraints around how much the banks are prepared to lend to them. But they are unfailingly rational as far as an economic perspective goes. If there's not a huge amount of competition in a market, the last thing you're going to do is flood the market with your product, because all that's going to do is suppress the prices and reduce your profit margins. So it actually doesn't make sense. They'd be irrational doing it any other way than they currently do. So, I think we need to be aware of that. And
I think we all are, aren't we? I mean, it's understandable, isn't it, really?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so
you're telling me the same old that we're...
Well, I think what this HBA does is it's given us a little bit more certainty around the capacity of our intensification areas. So the ability.
So Chris, we added the 20% margin in for that, didn't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, I might, through the chair, just add some comments. I think it's important to recognise that this HBA does this assessment. It's quite a dispassionate assessment, really. It's at arm's length. It's looking purely at, what our projected demand or population is likely to be over the 30 years, and looking at our current and likely future capacity. That capacity assessment is done under our current plan settings. That's the way that the MPS directs us to make that assessment. However, with the new plan, when we get a new plan up and running, we expect to see quite a different picture in terms of that shortfall. So in a way, this assessment, it's presenting information to you today as it's required to do today under today's settings. But we also need to be cognizant that those settings, we're already working, the council's working hard to change those settings to actually take care of things like this deficit.
Thank you for that. So encouraging.
Rachel, your turn.
Well, thanks, Brian. Team Gabrielle and Chris, I'm just referencing the report. So I'm looking at page, I think it's page 28 of the report or agenda. I can't actually tell what I'm on here. It's a section called Spotlight on Campgrounds. Can you find that one? It's section
28 of the report itself.
Yeah, 28 of the report. Okay, itself.
53, page 53 of the agenda.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies, I can't see the agenda pages on my screen at the moment. Look, I'm just looking at that one and going, that's news to me. I hadn't picked up that part of the Nelson plan, and I'm just wondering if that's consistent actually with the governance direction around campgrounds. And hopefully Councillor Noonan's still in the meeting, so she might like to, as chair of the Strategic Development and Property Committee, comment on that. I'm not sure that it is, which means I'm not that comfortable with that going in the report. So I just wonder if all arms of council are talking to each other at the moment. But if Councillor Noonan's there and wants to have a quick look at it, she might be able to give a more informed view than I can. You may need to come back to it.
Well, so I noticed that's a question that Janine's asked. I think the reply was the situation that is a retrospective resource consent has been applied for as well as exemption, which provides for the additional time to resolve. All this information is not public. Yeah.
Well, I made to say that the best of my knowledge would tell me that that section is not correct. So if you want to take an adjournment and sort it out, but I would not be happy sending that to the government because I do not believe that is correct.
Yeah, okay, we'll
I'm back to it.
We'll take an adjournment.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll reconvene the meeting. We were doing questions from you, Rachel. Did you have any further questions at this stage?
Look, the only other question just goes to the recommendation in the report, which is referencing this document as informing the regional development strategy. Excuse me, I'm trying to scroll back to get it. And I'm just feeling that might be. I just want to understand why understand a little about what is meant by the housing bottom lines will be adopted for inclusion in the district plan and regional policy statement. So how they're sitting in there at the moment. So I want to know is there something already in there, or is this part of the new requirement to add them in? And is the information that's there sufficiently up to date to do that, given the degree of change that we are that we're really anticipating probably within the next year to 2 years in terms of government interventions, things like the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund for housing. I'm just not sure that this document will adequately reflect a real state for that document. For the district plan regional policy statement.
So through the chair, yes, the MPSUD requires a housing bottom line, and it requires that to be inserted into the district plan and the regional policy statement. It's quite explicit about what the housing bottom line is. And yes, it is a new requirement under this MPSUD. There was no requirement from the past MPSUDC.
Okay, and Gabrielle, how often, and we can update that once we, if we see a change, which I'm anticipating we will see a change in terms of, given the presentation we had this morning and what the options are available to us, I'm anticipating seeing a change in the supply side, but that may be corresponded with the demand side starting to be met, so it might not be that we get any further ahead. So how often can we update that?
Through the chair, so from an MPSUD point of view, this housing business capacity assessment is done again every 3 years, and that's the point that will be updated. Whether the plan could do another amendment at a different time frame, I wouldn't be able to provide any advice on.
Okay, that's probably a question for Maxine. So Maxine, what I'm concerned about is that I don't think this is actually going to be by the time we get to notification of the plan, the Nelson plan, I think this is going to we'll be in a different scenario. And so I just want to make sure that we can, if we have to reference this information, it'll be like seen as historic, and then we'll be able to update with the more current information. Is that possible?
Yeah, through the chair, my expectation is we will use whatever, we would in all likelihood start with what's in the HBA in the notified version of the plan, unless we got something quite significantly different before that. But in terms of the timing of the Nelson plan, I don't know that we'll have any clarity on that before the Nelson plan's notified. However, we can have submissions on that matter that allow us to update that number as we go forward through the hearings process before decisions are issued. It will all, sorry, Claire, can I just finish one thing? But it will kind of depend a little bit of what the what the consequence of changing that number is. So does it actually impose greater requirements or less requirements on us? So we will need to consider that number, not just change it automatically.
Okay, thank you.
It would also be fair to say, Maxine, that while the number might need to be referenced, there could be nuances in terms of the wording that sits in both the RPS and the plan that would say, and over the last 12 months, 18 months, or wherever we've got to, we've not, the numbers are now looking like, because we'd have updated information.
Yes, but that will date it very quickly. I think we would try and make sure we can future-proof how that number gets referenced. And I would consider for any resource consent application, they've always got the ability to look at other documents or reports. So if we were able to provide an update on that capacity through our modelling, then I would expect a resource consent process could draw on that.
So can I then just ask a supplementary question on, so what effect does that have in terms of the plan? So for instance, if you put those numbers in, what influence do they have on, say, plan changes or resource consents? How is that information applied through a regulatory process?
There's multiple ways. One is it informs the development of the plan to kind of ensure that the zoning capacity matches what our requirements are. The second would be in consent decisions, that applicants could probably draw on that figure as a reason to allow for more development. And in a plan change sense, that would possibly drive potential applications where we had a deficit or a demand that we weren't meeting in the plan provisions.
Okay, thanks, Maxine.
I'm just going to ask another sort of timing question myself, just to follow on from that. A number of the data referenced, not exclusively, but like Census New Zealand data, but there were other times where 2018 data was used. I know that's because that was the most recent, but if this is to help inform our 2024 LTP, that data would then be 6 years old for the LTP. Is there going to be not necessarily updates to this document per se, but we won't rigidly sit with this once there is more up-to-date data, or how is that going to inform the LTP once more up-to-date data comes forward?
Yes, through the chair. Yes, we agree that the MPSUD has set these timeframes which don't quite so neatly fit with our own timeframes in terms of information. However, there are these 3-yearly cycles where we're reviewing and updating information. And there's nothing to say that we can't update that information earlier, or parts of the information earlier, if that was helpful. Chris has built a model that now is going to mean that that's easier for us to do that. However, I guess it has to be within the context that if you wanted a full HBA done, that is months worth of work for multiple people. So, so I'm not sure if that helps, but I guess what I'm saying is that we can update parts of that information. We will be doing another HBA before the 24 LTP, but it will be running up against that back end of the LTP approvals part, which makes it difficult to inform it unless we bring it forward and do it earlier.
I guess the key would be for me, the key for the LTP is those underlying assumptions, of course, that we build into our models, so that if there's anything within the HBA that is going to be used as a sort of key underlying assumption, if there's more recent data, then of course we would be using that. Is that correct?
When we do any updates to the model, yes, it's been set up so it's relatively straightforward to update those assumptions, yes. Great.
Just another small area that I noted was out of date was page 102. There's and 103, it just talks about the connecting road onto Waimea Road, and the map is quite old. Can we update that before it goes forward to council?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And we'll also remove the spotlight on campgrounds section as well. So we probably need to pick up both of those in the resolutions. Brian.
just following on sort of questions from the mayor. I'm just wondering just the influence that this document has on terms of the, if I work my way backwards, the Waikumaheri Nelson plan and the FDS. To me, it strikes me that this is actually quite a significant document which will influence. Just wondering, in terms of a peer review or getting a check or feedback from the development community or the demographer who is out there, what have we done, or is this just basically been an internal process?
Development of the model has been an internal process. We have had someone have a look at it to compare it, more for the purposes of comparing it to how Tasman's model works. But it's been pretty rigorously tested. We do, as I said earlier, we do talk to the developers on a fairly regular basis. We were lucky enough to have a developer who generously gave us some costs for a recent development that they'd done, so that we could then feed into the feasibility assessment. So we have had some involvement with them, with the developers, and of course, as far as the timing of when they're expecting their development to go ahead and how many lots per year and all of that sort of thing, we've had conversations with them, and that has fed into the model itself for the greenfield side of things.
So do we need to, have we done a sort of an assessment in terms of our certificates and engagement policy with us? Just sort of, I'm mindful as we put it out there. And
So through the chair, yes, I saw that you'd sent through a question about that earlier. So this is a technical document that it doesn't require public consultation in terms of gathering the public's feedback. It's meant to really be sort of an analytical assessment at arm's length, rather than, it's not an opinions document, and it's not asking you to make a decision other than make the decision to adopt the housing bottom line. And so for those reasons, that's how it's assessed under our policy.
I'll go to Rachel.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Judine. So look, I found that a really interesting question from Brian, and actually a really good question, because we've just had the conversation about how it influences our probably, I'd say it's more important document than the long-term plan, the Nelson plan. And it's big. It's really big, because it's going to be part of a regulatory process. So I guess that integrity side of things of just being really sure. So when we had a meeting with TDC, or a workshop with TDC, one of the issues that we discussed was the need for a coordinated growth model across the two councils. So have we been able to do a bit of a, if we'd run TDC's growth model instead of our growth model, what this would have looked like? Because there's both sides of it. There's both the demand side for growth, which consistently, as elected members, we're saying to you as officers, we think you've got that really undercooked. And what you're seeing is a totally strangled market at the moment, which is why you're not seeing the growth side. So just have we been able to have a go at resolving that growth model yet, just to reference this to make sure it lands?
So we running data through the Tasman growth model is a pretty involved process that they spend months building up to, and then it's pretty involved, and not something that we could have done in the time that we had available for preparing the HBA. So we haven't got that comparison with what that may have told us. The other thing is that their growth model is very much it relies on a infrastructure rollout model. So it almost it's almost the reverse of how ours works, in that it looks at the likelihood of, if they rolled out infrastructure to a certain area, what would the yield be, and does it that way around, rather than the way that we've looked at it where we ours is more intensification based. That's where the most of the modelling has been, and so that's around purely capacity. Like, are there suitable areas, suitable sites? Count those up, and then they count as capacity. We are about to launch into some work in response to the feedback we had about aligning the growth models. So that's something that I'm beginning in the next week or two.
So can I just come back on a couple of things there? I think the governance direction wasn't about aligning the growth models. It's about, could we please have one growth model for the region? So it's not about aligning. It was my understanding. So other elected members who are at our joint session with TDC may have a different view, but I'm pretty clear it was about having, could we please work to one growth model? The other issue is actually this issue of infrastructure rollouts. Through the development of all of the activity management plans, particularly around infrastructure, that was actually the direction from the beginning of the LTP process. Was the council said it's a priority on housing. Please make sure that you're lining up your infrastructure to open up as much housing supply as you can. So what I'm hearing now is that actually, which kind of explains a bit, is why we got to the final stages of the LTP and we couldn't get what's the yield off the infrastructure investment. So it leaves me again really concerned that the behaviours that we've been using to develop the supply side haven't been about supply. They haven't been about actually generating that supply side. And I guess what I'm looking at and thinking about is, I heard the conversation around, this is a market dynamic and people will bring it forward. But actually, when there's a lever in the market that says, like the Accelerated Infrastructure Fund, well, what happens then? So isn't that our role as well in local government to make sure that when we've got an absolute crisis with housing supply, that we're putting our infrastructure and looking to sit down with developers to say, we bring this infrastructure forward and we put this infrastructure in, how many houses can you bring up to the market? Within some constraints, because we said we didn't want development, spread right out, right out beyond the, well beyond the urban boundary out to Haira. We said no to that one. But isn't that what we said as a governance direction? And so shouldn't that be sitting in this model as well? And I'm sorry to have to do this by Zoom because I can't see your reactions to my comments or anyone else's in the room or even who's in the room. But I do feel like I'm listening to a conversation that feels like a mismatch between, and it has done for quite some time, between what the governance direction was for this triennium and what we're hearing now, which seems to still be setting us in play for a continued mismatch between the governance LTP direction and actually what we're setting up in terms of our systems and processes.
So just to be clear on the model, the reason, so what the model actually does is it identifies where there is potential for capacity, and then it goes and looks at, okay, where's best bang for buck for putting our infrastructure. That's sort of the next step where we get the asset management teams in and they identify. But if we don't do that stage of identifying where the best bang for buck is first, so where there's capacity, and particularly in the intensification space, then we don't know where to put our infrastructure in the first place. Tasman is far more greenfield driven, and we've done a lot in Nelson. We've done a lot of our greenfield servicing up front. There's very little really to do for most of the greenfield sites. It's all either been done or is programmed in the LTP to be done, the final stages. The focus of our LTP, the rollout of infrastructure has been in terms of housing capacity, it's been more around intensification. It's entirely the opposite for Tasman. They haven't front-loaded all of their servicing for all of their greenfield areas. So the way they do their modelling reflects that.
So through the chair, I might also add, it doesn't mean that we're not also providing infrastructure for greenfield areas. That is absolutely part of the work that the infrastructure teams does. And also the discussions around the LTP were making sure that the funding for infrastructure was available where it needed to be, and there were priority areas that were identified for that, for the brownfield areas as well.
So sorry, Julian, to take up so much time on this, but the FDS was quite clear that neither council could deliver housing supply that focused solely on brownfield intensification. That is slow, it requires aggregation of titles, and greenfield played a role in both. So thank you for adding that in, Claire. But what I'm hearing is, and I guess what I'm going to be fascinated to see is that if we see a increase in supply through the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund, that's possible. I'm wondering why in the conversations with developers, we didn't bring that infrastructure forward to bring forward the supply. Given the problems we've got at the moment.
So I think one of the reasons developers may be applying to the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund is it may change the economics of a development. That they may have sat and waited for longer until section prices rose even further, and they see if they can get some of this infrastructure provided at less cost, that it may change the dynamics of their development and bring it forward.
Okay, so then we've got now a significant lever in the market coming into play, which is, I guess, going back to Carrie's comment in the first session today of what was missing, that's now potentially coming to the market, which would make me think that the document that we're adopting today is not likely, unless Nelson is particularly not on the radar of the government at the moment in terms of investment in housing, which does concern me given one of the other GPS documents I'm looking at, that document will be actually reflective of what we like to see in 2 or 3 years' time, which is why I feel at the moment, I get the officers can only deal with what's in front of them, but I'm just as probably speaking to the governors at the table to say, send it up to council, but as I receive other documents up to council, I'm just going to say this is a very dynamic space, and we need to be ready to use other methods to overcome what could become a bit of a regulatory issue in our biggest document that we operate, which is the Nelson Plan. Given going back to Brian's comments, that this is it does have a significant impact. It's not an inconsequential report, this one. So it's just a matter of making sure that we are dealing with it as we have to. We don't have a choice around it, as I understand. We have to do it. We have to send it in. It has to be done by a certain time frame. But it doesn't reflect the dynamic environment that we're operating in at the moment.
So through the chair, I entirely agree. So we have to do this. We'll put it up. But I think the bit that we need to focus on is the covering statement to the minister that we can make to put the bigger picture around it when we actually provide it to the minister. So we can upfront in the covering letter, which could be quite extensive, talk about all of the things that we're doing, all the levers that we're using, Nelson Plan changes, all of those things.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for that. No, that was good discussion. Thank you. Just want to dive in a little bit just to some of the data that sort of frequently talks about, sort of birth rates, death rates. But what I didn't see come through that I recall was divorce rates. And divorce rate impacts on two things. It duplicates the need for housing, and it also then frequently can require more smaller housing again. If the children have left, for example, or even if they haven't, one often ends up as a sole household, etc. So is divorce, because divorce rates are quite high these days, aren't they?
So I haven't looked at that at all. We, when we're building up our population projections, there's the three key things that we have available to us that, are published by Stats New Zealand that we can use, and that's births, deaths, and net migration. So there's adjustments over time that they'll make in their population estimates, which is our starting point. But no, we haven't looked at those at all.
Right. Do other councils, do you know?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. It probably, I mean, because I believe divorce rate is actually getting up there, although marriage rate is reducing. But I guess it might just be worth considering it for either the update of this, that, the next time we update it, or for any other documents, just, having a look at, is this something, is divorce going to be something that will impact on this?
Yes, noted. And through the chair, I just want to check that you're talking about people that remain divorced and out of relationships. So you're not talking about people, you're suggesting that as people divorce, that there's a need for two houses, but not counting whether they repartner back into one house at some future point.
Yeah, because it can depend on what age it happens. The other thing, just again, just a minor point for probably noting for next time, or a couple of points, just in the list of facilities for proximity, that was on page 191. Arts facilities, theatres, movies, music venues wasn't there at all. There was recreation, but the examples provided were specifically sport ones. So I think that would be a good addition for the survey for next time. And then page 51, the accommodation supplement data, and it may have been a blip during COVID, but it might be something worth looking at as a trend, and again seeing if this is something we need to consider going forward. Is just during COVID-19, at least, I believe that there was an increasing proportion of those who received the accommodation supplement that were actually in employment versus those we traditionally, think of, which are beneficiaries, superannuitants. So, just worthwhile looking at, either for the update of this or anything else that, you're sort of looking at accommodation supplement around. Right. I don't think I have any further questions. Any further questions from anyone? Gail, you're right. Welcome.
I've got one as well. No, you could take your committee members first.
Okay, Kate.
I just wanted to follow up on your point about divorcees. I think perhaps the word is people who are single. So they might not have got married to begin with. They might just be single for life, or they might choose to be. But I guess it's the number of people per household. I would have thought that we have a decreasing rate of number of children as well. So, and people who are choosing not to have children. So our demographic is changing in terms of. And if we take it from Matt, didn't Matt say that women over 65 in Nelson who are living on their own are the happiest people in this country? Looking forward to getting there.
No, I think I was after divorce, just because if you've currently got two adults in one house and they do divorce, then you instantly need to double your number of houses.
You're making an assumption they were married to begin with. They might be just two
so
people
living together.
Or they might be going into another house.
Yeah. Yes. And I think it's a really important conversation to have, but also just remembering we generally make an assumption that there's two incomes for one household. And so if people are single income households, so looking at single income households, or people might end up having aging parents, all sorts of demographics that will happen over periods of time. But the model that, at the moment in New Zealand, you can probably only afford to live in a house if there's two incomes, based on my experience anyway. No, I just wanted to add to that.
Thank you. Just a query on, I know that you weren't including the wood in your numbers, but I know that there are some developments happening in that area. So have you got those included somewhere?
No, any development that's happened, that doesn't count as for capacity into the future. That's counted as current supply, and that's essentially counted as being taken up by current population. Fully accept that there will be development that occurs outside the areas and the outside the sites that are identified in the model. as suitable for development, because everyone's got different drivers for why they might do a development. What's included in the model was what's allowed to be included by the MPSUD, which says that it has to be plan enabled and all those infrastructure ready, all those sorts of things. So if it's sitting in an overlay, then it's not automatically plan enabled. Plan enabled is what is it? Restricted discretionary, and more enabled than that, essentially. If it's full discretionary, for example, so if there's a hazard overlay, that's more likely to be discretionary, and therefore it can't be counted.
So you don't have to tell a big story. There was a development under the Hasher Act for a multiple dwelling down Trafalgar Street. Is that included here or is it not?
If it hasn't been developed yet, then it may be. But it depends.
I'm just wondering how many are sitting in that area across the whole of Nelson that's not covered in here specifically, and what impact that might have on the numbers.
Without looking at the actual model for individual houses and individual areas, I can't tell you that.
So just through the chair, we can get back to you on that specific question. What Chris is saying, he can't categorically say until he switches his model on. But from what I understand, all those areas are included. But we'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, okay, because I just wonder whether it might change the dynamics and the numbers when they're not specifically included or articulated in the report. But it may have an impact on the overall. There might be more developments coming through that actually aren't reflected here. Rachel.
Chris, in your model, of the consented dwellings, the new ones, what percentage did you put in for residential? If they were for residential dwellings, which did you put the whole percentage in as being used for residential purposes, like housing?
Sorry, in what context are we talking? In the city centre, or are we talking? It sort of depends a little bit on the area as to how we treated them.
Oh, okay. Well, that's what I want to understand. So I'm just looking at, so if I'm looking at some of the housing data that I've got around our challenge, I know that for the last 10 years, our consents have not kept pace with population growth, a number of consents, and of those, we don't know what proportion of those homes went into non-residential housing. So I'm just wondering whether you put, them all in, or you did something else with them, because what we know is, I would know anecdotally, but I haven't done a count up, that quite a few of those properties that would come in as residential developments are not used for residential development. They're used as holiday accommodation or Airbnbs.
Okay, so we, so the model has we essentially calculate a base capacity, and then we apply an uptake rate to that base capacity, which is basically recognising that not everyone's going to go, okay, I can develop my site and develop the site at the same time, or even over the 30 years. Only a certain proportion will choose to.
Sorry, no, I'm probably talking. So I'm talking about as you roll into the model. So you'll start off with, we've got X number of houses, right?
Yeah.
So presumably we start from we have so many.
Yes.
From the last time, then we know there's a number of new houses that have been, we know if it's been X number of consents issued for X number of dwellings. So they must come in there somewhere.
Yes, no, you're right. And they count. I count everything that's been granted as a residential dwelling, but hasn't been built yet, or hasn't gained title yet. We count as current capacity.
Okay, so I think we're probably a bit overstating that on the basis of we would go, if we did an audit of all of the houses that have been built, all of the dwellings that have been built, I think you'll find a fair proportion of those are not used for the purposes of residential housing, or a number of them are. So we might have some overcounting in that sense. It may not be material in your model, but I just think we need to be really cognizant of the fact that because of the Rating Act and the way that we're allowing Airbnbs to be used as commercial premises, and we don't deal with that, we haven't gone back and dealt with that. That is, if you're doing it basically on the consents as they go through, then you're probably overcooking it a bit, but it may not be material in the scheme because there's actually been not a huge number of consents in the last 10 years.
So with respect to Airbnbs in particular and holiday homes, that's really built into the demand side of things. So we don't just apply 20%. There's a small margin there that we allow for holiday homes because we've done a previous audit of the proportion of houses that are used for holiday homes.
Done an audit, so we know as a percentage of houses in Nelson.
Yes. So we apply that to the demand side of things rather than the capacity side because it's just a bit tidier from the modelling perspective.
Oh, okay. I don't understand why you wouldn't do it on the supply side. Sorry, the supply of housing side. So if we're assuming that we've got X number of houses, but we know that they're not available for homes as such, don't we have to do something about that?
So,
I must just be misinterpreting what you're saying.
So instead of because we don't really know how that's going to be going forward with the capacity side of things. Instead, what we do is we look at we have a base demand for we take population, we apply a occupancy rate for average occupancy rate to our population. That gets us our households. We know that a certain percentage we need a certain percentage on top of that to account for holiday homes, and then we put the competitiveness margin on top of that, and that gets our ultimate demand for housing, how many houses we need to have in the market essentially.
Okay, so the percentage goes on top, which is that's your holiday accommodation.
That's correct.
Okay, I'll give up now.
Okay, Gail.
Just a quick thing. I'm just wondering if you might want to check with Nikki McDonald. We had a meeting yesterday about people coming into Nelson, and it's been, it's obviously substantially more than this. It was a PHO. It was quite a growth. So I just want to check that you check your assumptions, because if there's a significant growth in the last maybe 6 months, would that have an impact on all of this?
So through the chair, in respect of population projections, it's very clear from the NPSUD that we need to justify which population projection series that we're using. In this case, it's pretty standard practice to use the population projection series that you've adopted for your LGP, and that is what has been brought through for this HBA. Now, this HBA, if you check the latter part of it, the NPS UD also says, well, hang on, what if you got your population series wrong? We also want you to understand the material impact of if you chose the wrong series. So as a result, we've had to do some scenario testing of actually what that would mean, and you'll find some of that information in the back. So I guess what the NPSUD is asking this council and all the councils around New Zealand that have to do one, that are tier 1 and tier 2 councils, is to do this assessment so that we've essentially, you're able to ask all these very, very good questions, and we're able to get clearer about what actually is happening in our local market, and we're able to plan for our future growth in a planned and thoughtful manner. It's not asking necessarily for all the information at this point, given that it's looking backwards to gain its information to be 100% correct. It's saying it's all right, we know that there's variability, but we're also asking you to understand some of that variability in this. So some of these questions that you're asking, yes, the MPS is asking of us as well. So we've had to put forward one population series and base the bulk of our HBA on that analysis, but we have some subsequent information of, exactly that. What if we got our series wrong? What if we were actually running at a high series? What would that mean? Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yes, I must admit, I did. It took me some time, but I did actually appreciate, getting a lot of that background data as to, what things were built up from. So that was very helpful. Do we have any final questions? We've got amended resolution on the screen, and that's the an additional number 2, and that's removing the spotlight on campgrounds and the updates to the wording on page 102 and the map on page 103 in regards to Tasman Heights. So they're the ones we agreed to. Okay, so move Brian, second Mel. Any debate? All those in favour? Against, carried. That included all the recommendations to council, didn't it? Yes. Good, it did. Yep, great. It did. Yeah, that was the whole lot, all at once.
So what goes to council will just be the bottom bit?
Yes.
We'll provide the amended report. As a link.
Yeah. Okay, so we will now move into committee. Moved Mel, second Brian. All those in favour? Against, carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.